Today we'll be discussing one of the most just out there, just insane, crazy disappearances that I have ever read about in my entire life. Today we'll be discussing the Yuba County Five. The Yuba County Five is the story of five men who disappeared on their way back from a basketball game at the California State University in Chico on February 24th, 1978. So the five men were known locally as the Boys, and that's what I'll probably be referring to them as throughout this episode. The Boys consisted of five men, all between the ages of 24 and 32, and each with their own sort of mental... Why? Each member of the group had their own mental health issues or mental disabilities, and if you research this topic, that point of their mental disabilities or mental handicaps was really, really hammered into by the media at the time as the reason that they disappeared. And I don't necessarily believe that, and a lot of people don't believe that because the way that they were depicted in the media at the time was very harsh and very demeaning. So we're going to start with each person, each member of the group, and we're going to discuss them a little bit in depth just so that you can get a good understanding of each person and what made them who they are and how that kind of plays into... This is Bingus. He's my cat. What? He's going to hang out with us for a little bit. First, we're starting with Ted Werner, the oldest of the five boys. He was 32 years old, and he lived with his parents. He was a pretty outgoing guy. He loved to meet new people, make new friends, and he was unemployed. But at some point, he did have a job as a janitor. Now, I'm not going to assume anything, because I'm not like a doctor or I don't know anything about psychiatry or anything like that. But from all accounts, he was kind of slow and he didn't fully understand the severity of certain things, if that makes sense. For example, he spent $100 on pencils. And when his family asked why, because they weren't any like specialty pencils, just like some normal everyday pencil, he didn't really understand why he did that. His finances were managed by his parents because of things like this. Another example is that one day his family home was on fire, and when his family woke him up from, to get him out of the house, he saw that his house was on fire, the ceiling of his bedroom was on fire, and decided that it would be irresponsible to get up because he'd be tired for work in the morning. Next up, we have Jackie Hewitt, who was the youngest at 24 and Ted's best friend. He relied on his parents because he couldn't read or write and he had a slight speech impediment and he hated using phones. It's often stated that he said he never could use them or didn't have the ability to. It wasn't that he couldn't, he just chose not to because he didn't like them and it stressed him out. When he was out and about with people, he usually needed support from his parents or from, like I said, his best friend Ted to get throughout the day. But besides this, he was a very outgoing, a very loving human being and was a very careful person. Now, these two are the only two that actually were officially diagnosed with a mental handicap. The others were just considered to be slow to an extent, and then one with a severe psychiatric disorder, which we will get to when we talk about him. Next, we have Jack Madruga. He was 30 years old, and he was pretty independent. He was the only one that owned a car, and one of the two boys who had a driver's license. He drove a Mercury Montego, which he loved and was extremely protective over. He always took great care of it. He cleaned it himself, and if there was anything wrong with it, he would always do the maintenance, if not all of it by himself, then most of it by himself. He loved his car, and it was like his pride jewel of living, basically. I don't know why I'm doing this, but he loved it. It was his baby. Like I said, he was very independent. He was in the military for 2 years. He drove trucks for the Army. He graduated high school. And he doesn't have like a formal diagnosis of any kind of mental handicap. He was just considered to be a little slow for someone his age, I guess you could say. Next, we have Bill Sterling at 29 years old. He was Jack's best friend. He was a super cheerful guy, super loving person. He also had a fair amount of independence and self-reliability. He did have a job as a dishwasher. However, he was forced to quit that job because people were taking advantage of him and stealing his money because of his trusting nature and his quote-unquote slowness, for lack of better words. He was a deeply religious man and often volunteered at a local hospital. So he seems like a pretty chill dude. You know, he seems pretty nice, just a little too trusting. Finally, we have Gary Mathias at 25. He wasn't like mentally disabled, didn't have any mental handicaps, but he was schizophrenic. He was in the military for a few years and stationed in Germany, where he developed a drug problem, which led to him being diagnosed with schizophrenia. He then left the military and moved back home with his parents, and then he met the boys, I guess you could say. He was seen as the leader, for lack of better words, of the Yuba County Five, like the boys. And at the time, he had a pretty steady relationship with his high school sweetheart. When he returned home, he started getting treatment at a local hospital for his schizophrenia, and that had a pretty rough start, being that he was almost arrested twice for assaults, and he would experience like psychiatric episodes. However, after he got the treatment that he needed and he started taking his medication, he was considered to be one of like the quote-unquote success stories of this program that he was a part of, because it was like a big turnaround for him, and he basically was pretty normal after that. He was just had to take his medications and go to his therapies. His case was more of I don't fully understand what's happening to me because of my severe mental illness, so I'm going to lash out because I can't understand what's going on with my own mind. And then, like I said, after his treatments, he was totally fine. And this might seem like a red flag right from the get-go, but we're going to kind of discuss that a little bit down the line. All 5 of the boys were part of a program called the Gateway Projects, and this was a program in Yuba County that was designed to help those with mental illnesses or mental disorders get the help and get jobs or have the resources they needed for their treatments. What? Well, you want to say something? You want to say something? Say hi. Oh, okay, bye. This is where all of the boys met and became friends. Originally, it was just the 4 boys, Jack, Jackie, Bill, and Ted, and then about a year before the disappearance, Gary joined the program and became part of the friend group. The biggest thing that the boys bonded over was their love for basketball, and they played for the Gateway Gators at the Yuba City Vocational Rehabilitation Center. They loved basketball. It was like their shit, basically. They did it together all the time. It was their biggest bonding moments were because of basketball. On February 25th, 1978, the Gateway Gators, their basketball team, was scheduled to play in the Special Olympics tournament in Sacramento. And this was a huge deal for the boys, obviously. The boys were particularly excited for the prize of winning the tournament, which was a week-long trip to LA with all expenses paid. Which, dude, I would fucking love to have that, not gonna lie. I mean, maybe not now. I mean, I could not handle driving in LA because I don't know if I can have that in there, but it's such a disaster. Maybe back then it was fine, but I don't have a mental handicap, so I can only imagine. That's horrible. According to the families, the boys were so excited that they started to lay out their uniforms and their clothes for the event, kind of like how you would for like a trip in school, like how you would lay out your clothes the night before. That's what the boys were doing in preparation for this. So it just shows how innocent and how excited that these men were for this event and how special it was to them. And that, for me, makes it so sad about what happens next, because they just seem like such a wholesome, loving, just like great friend group, and then it just fucking goes to shit, and it's horrible. To everybody's surprise, they decided to make a last-minute trip to Chico, California, about 50 miles from where they lived, to watch their favorite team, UC Davis, play against the Chico State University team. And obviously this was strange because the boys needed routine, and it's super important for those who have mental handicaps or certain mental illnesses to have a strict routine that they can stick to. However, the families knew that the boys loved each other and that they were going to take care of one another on this trip, and saw how important this game was to them. So they decided that it was fine, and they're capable enough, especially together, that everything would be okay. Mr. Bingus. Everybody see Mr. Bingus? He's hanging out. Say hi to Mr. Bingus, everyone. It's Mr. Buddy Mans. He helps me edit these, by the way. He's way better at it than I am. So, off they went to this game in Chico, California, and that was the last time the families ever saw their sons alive again. The following morning, Bill's mother woke up around 2 a.m. and realized that Bill hadn't returned. And obviously this is concerning because of, duh, I would be if I was his parent, obviously. So she called one of the other boys' parents, and to her surprise, no one had returned. No one had come back from the game, and no one had heard from them since they left for the game. 6 hours later, at 8 a.m., Jack's mom called the police and tried to file a missing persons report. And the, in my opinion, shittiest thing ever happens is that because they were grown adults, they weren't allowed to report it that early, I guess you could say, and they had to wait 24 hours. And in my opinion, it's like, yes, I get that they're adults, but the issue is like they all have their own mental illnesses, mental handicaps, and I'm not saying that makes them less capable, but if something were to happen, maybe they're not particularly, how do I say this, of the right mind to handle a more overwhelming situation. I mean, and I think that's a fair worry to have. And to express that to the authorities and not have the authorities take it seriously is upsetting. 12 hours later at 8 p.m., the authorities then sent out a missing persons report and a description of Jack's turquoise and white 1969 Mercury Montague, in hopes of anyone having any leads on where the boys may be or might have gone. First, law enforcement confirmed that they did in fact make it to the basketball game and did make it to Chico, California, as they intended. This was confirmed by eyewitness reports of people seeing them at the game, and then also by programs found in Jack's car, which we'll get to in a minute, from the basketball game itself. So they did make it to the game, so that something must have happened at the game or on the way back from the game. And we're going to get into theories later. A call from Bears Market came in, and that was a store just down the road from where the game was, and they reported that the boys had come in around 10 p.m., just around closing time, to get snacks and beverages, and they were heading south. So that means that the boys left the game and were going to get snacks and drinks for the road trip back to Yuba County, and this was where they had stopped to do so. So there is reason to believe that something happened between that store and Yuba County that led them to, we wouldn't be talking about it on this channel if it was all hunky-dory. On Monday, 2 days later, on February 27th, the police received a phone call from a Plumas National Forest ranger who had said that he found the car, or a car, matching the description of Jack's 1969 Mercury Montague. And he actually saw it the day before on Saturday, but assumed that it was a skier because where the car was found, there is a big bunch of mountains, was a very popular area for skiing and snowboarding at the time, so he assumed that it was just somebody either sightseeing or skiing and didn't think much about it. And then when the car didn't leave and he heard of the police report. He obviously was in like, oh shit, this could be the missing people. I should probably call this in. I want you to take a second and guess how far away the car was from Chico, from where the game was. Just take a second. The car was found 70 miles northeast into the mountains. That's like an hour, give or take, drive in the opposite direction from which they were supposed to be heading. Up into the snowy mountains. What a haze! Obviously, this is concerning because, I mean, what would compel 5 grown adults, and yes, I understand that they have their own mental difficulties, but I feel like that doesn't explain why they would drive an extra hour or so into the mountains at night and then completely disappear. Obviously, this is concerning because what could have compelled them to do that? To drive out into the middle of the mountains at night during the winter, totally out of character for them, and then just abandon the car completely. I don't know what compels someone to do that. And some points of concern are that car had no signs of struggle whatsoever. There was no blood. There was no suspicion of a crime scene in the sense of like someone being attacked or anything. Windows were completely intact. There was no signs of fighting. All the windows were down and the car was unlocked, which is concerning because Jack loved his car, loved it. He always locked his car when he wasn't in it, and then he left the windows down in the winter. Doesn't make any sense because he obviously cared a lot about his car. Why would he leave it exposed to the elements like that? Another point of concern is that none of the boys were prepared for an adventure into the woods, especially in the wintertime. They were dressed for indoor activities because that's what they were doing. They were going to be inside most, if not the entire time. They were gone, and the plan was to drive to the game and immediately come back because, one, they had a big game coming up, and it was very important to them. And then routine is super important, and straying from the norm is obviously not something that they would enjoy, and they already are doing that going to this game. So I feel like having the 2 straying last-minute decisions would be troublesome. The car itself was stuck, but not unstuckable, for lack of better words. It would have been totally possible for the 5 athletes to push the car out of the ditch/snow that it was stuck in. And when the cops arrived at the scene, they hotwired the car, and it had 1/4 of a tank of gas. So it would have been enough to at least make it somewhere else to get help or to get gas or something. So it's not like they couldn't have left with the car, if that makes sense, or at least stayed in the car where it was warm, where they could have, huddled together. They could have kept the heater running, all this kind of thing, but they were nowhere to be found. Extra points were that they found wrappers and receipts from the market that was referenced earlier, showing that they did in fact go get food and drinks to make the trip back. So something after that stop compelled them to head up to the mountains and drive as far into the mountains as possible, because the car had made it all the way up until the road was blocked for the winter season. So they were compelled to drive, like I said, as far as they possibly could before leaving the vehicle. The car was taken in for more investigation, and there was no evidence to be found, or usable evidence, I should say, outside of what I've already discussed, that could help in the investigation to where these men might be. Some extra little factoids was that Jack hated the cold and didn't like the mountains at all, hated it very much, and Bill didn't like going up there either. Once, when he was a kid, his father took him to a fishing spot area near where the car was located, and he didn't like it. And every time after that, he would refuse to go and would stay home while his father went fishing or on these fishing trips by himself. On February 28th, the search for the boys began. This involved every kind of search effort that you could think of. It had the police, it had normal everyday people. It had helicopters, the National Guard, sniffer dogs, snowmobiles, cameras, all of it. All tech, everything, and nothing came up. Could not find them whatsoever. After several days of searching, the authorities could not come up with any usable evidence or leads of any kind. And due to the worsening weather conditions and a large snowstorm, the search for the boys was canceled. Because of the lack of evidence, a lot of the family members of the missing men believed that foul play was involved somehow, which would mean somebody potentially forced them to do this extra little trip thing or forced them out into the wild. For what reason, I have no idea. There is one specific account of the boys that I'm going to talk about in more detail than others because it relates to a later theory and has kind of become this very popular story in relation to the Yuba County Five. Joseph Scoggins was from Sacramento, and he owned a cabin somewhat close to where the boys' car was found. And his account of certain events has a lot of mud in the water. Joseph had a history of heart issues, and this is important because his story was that he was driving up this mountain for a skiing trip and got his car stuck in a snowbank. In an attempt to push it out of the snow, he had a heart attack and threw up all over himself. And this is important, I know. He managed to get himself back in his car and passed out basically and just waited for someone to come get him. A few hours later, he woke up to what was Jack's car stuck in the snowbank further down the mountain. And the interesting thing was that he says that next to the boy's car was a red pickup truck. He saw a bunch of figures standing around the truck and the car, and that one of the figures was a woman holding a baby or a young child. Now, this is significant because this is not the only account of a red pickup truck and the five boys, and we're going to get into that when we talk about the theories, because I think it's a little weird. Joseph then tried to get their attention for help, and in doing so, it seemed that he scared everybody, all these people, whether they're the boys or not, and all of the people got back into their car and scrambled away. Then he then passed out again, and then woke up, was able to get his car unstuck, and drove back down the mountain. And when he passed the boy's car, he didn't think anything of it because the report of them missing was not out to the public yet. So he didn't report anything until later. Now, some people say that this account is garbage because he, Joseph, was the town drunk. He would often pass out because of his drinking. He would often, shit his pants because of his drinking and make up random stories. It was in his character to drunk drive off into the distance and pass out and all this stuff. However, I would discredit this account. I just need to know more about this red truck, and I don't. And I'll tell you why this upsets me later. I know I keep saying that, but just hold on. And that was it. That was all that came out of it for the next 4 months. 4 months. On June 4th, 1978, a motorcyclist was driving through the mountains and came across a United States Forest Service trailer. And he noticed that the window had been broken in. He then went to investigate to see what was happening, and he had found a body wrapped in sheets in the trailer. And this trailer was located 20 miles from where the car was found. Police identified the body as Ted and had said that he had been there for 3 months before they found his body. What the fuck is that shit, dude? How did he get there? Why is he wrapped up? You tell me he's been dead for 3 months? And not a single person was like, I should check up on this trailer? How did they determine he was there for 3 months? Good question. When they found his body, he had a full beard, and when he originally had left for the trip, he was completely shaven clean. Bare face, body has a beard. And he had lost over 100 pounds and died from starvation and hypothermia. Now, this is very, very important because of the state of the food rations and no use of a heating device ever was used. This is actually insane because upon further investigation, the trailer was filled and scattered with open cans of food, rations, and had 2 storage sheds full of like survival rations, if you will. But only one of them was broken into, and not all of the food was taken. And the cabin trailer was equipped with a propane tank for a heater, but it was never turned on. And Ted dies from hypothermia and starvation when they probably didn't have to. But why? Like, what happened? There was plenty of food to be found. It was reported that there was enough food that all 5 men could have survived on it until the police had found them. There was no signs of an attempt for fire, even though they had paperback books and matches. No fire. The propane tank was never attempted. There was no attempt to turn it on. No sign of anyone trying to mess with it. And there was enough winter clothing for all 5 men to have survived the conditions. But the clothes were never used. So they had everything they needed to survive. Access to everything they would have needed, but didn't use it. Let's talk about Ted's body for a second. It was wrapped in 8 bed sheets, kind of like a mummy. His arms were crossed on his chest, and he was barefoot. So this implies that obviously someone wrapped him up after he died, because how do you wrap yourself like that tightly, like a mummy, and then die? I mean, I can't. And then the reason him being barefoot is significant is that his feet were swollen and his boots must have been taken off, obviously, but they were never found. However, Gary Mathias's tennis shoes were found in the trailer. Some people think that maybe Gary took his boots in replacement of his shoes to wander off into the wild. The next day, the bodies of Madurga and Sterling were found 11.5 miles away from the car on the other side of the road. Madurga's body was found partially ravaged by animals, and only bones of Sterling's body was found. And what the authorities believe is that they died from hypothermia, and what they think happened is that they potentially, being friends, were trying to stick together and eventually fell asleep and died from hypothermia, because the whole falling asleep while you're cold is the last stages of hypothermia. And some believe that potentially one might have died before the other, and the other one didn't want to leave their friend's side and fell to the elements along with his best friend. And that is such a depressing, such a scary thought, because imagine being in the middle of the woods, in the middle of winter, the mountains of all places, and the only person that you have is your best friend, and they die. And that's all you got. You have no idea where you are. You don't know how to get back to any safety, and now you're completely alone. That has to be the most overwhelming and just distressing situation to be in. Sometimes the only thing getting you through that is the other people that you're with. And to have your best friend die right in front of you like that has to kill morale. And I believe that the human spirit can get you through so many horrible things, but that's gotta be devastating, dude. Another awesome, super dope moment in this case is Jackie Hewitt's dad finding his son's dead body. During one of the searches, after the initial bodies are found, his father picked up a piece of clothing that he found, and his son's spine fell out, and then the rest of the bones followed. And this body was found 2 miles northeast of the trailer, so further northeast than Ted's body. Dental records confirmed that it was Jackie's body, and that he died from hypothermia. And that's gotta be horrific. About a 1/4 mile northwest of the trailer, there was found 3 Forest Service blankets and a rusted flashlight. Now, how they got here, nobody knows. It was as if someone brought them from the trailer to this location and then vanished. Now, you might be asking, where's Gary? What happened to Gary? Nobody has any idea. He is still missing to this day. Is that not absolutely horrible? Is that not the worst thing ever? So let's get into some theories, because obviously with that bomb right there, you're going to be like, well, what the actual fuck is going on? So everyone is accounted for except for Gary. And some people think that Gary put those blankets and flashlight there because the theory is that he took Ted's boots and replaced them for his shoes, because his shoes obviously were not meant for walking through the winter. Took a bunch of blankets to stay warm and took a flashlight and ventured off in hopes of finding the car or getting help, and maybe succumbing to the elements or something, or just giving up. I have no idea. I know that when you start to succumb to hypothermia, a lot of people get naked because your body starts to get, or at least feel hot, and then you die because you're actually freezing to death, and it's like a surge of something. I can't remember exactly. So maybe that's why the blankets and everything were found, and there were no remains, or maybe it was a mountain lion and dragged his body off somewhere. We have no idea what happened to him. Some people think that Gary might have convinced the boys to visit some friends that he had in Forbestown, and by doing so they made a wrong turn and then eventually drove up the mountain. And maybe, but it doesn't explain why they left the car. Why would you leave the car? I mean, two of the men were in the military, and obviously you go through some form of training, so they're capable people. I would assume that they would understand that leaving the vehicle would be a horrible idea, and you would want to stay near civilization. And right now, civilization is the car, because you're putting yourself in uncertain waters if you just wander off into the mountains. A theory that attempts to explain how the boys got to the trailer in the first place was a potential snowcat trail that was created a few days before the boys went missing. And maybe because they were stuck in the snow and they needed help, they were like, okay, well, here's this man-made trail. Maybe it leads to a house. Maybe it leads to some kind of area where we can get assistance, and start to follow it into the mountains. And then on this trek to the trailer, people started to die off. But that doesn't explain why the bodies were found on the opposite side of the road. It only explains how the men that made it to the trailer could have made it to the trailer, but it still doesn't explain why they would have split up in the first place. Maybe the two that were found on the opposite side of the road may have backtracked and missed the road and walked, because of the snow, they couldn't figure out where the road was, and that's how they ended up on the other side. And the others just kept going in hopes of finding this structure. Or this hypothetical structure at the end of this trail. We don't know. Again, a lot of people suspected that they were quote unquote too dumb. That's what a lot of people back then. When this story first broke, a lot of news outlets just attributed this to their mental states and their mental illnesses and handicaps as the reason that they disappeared. And I can't accept that, because yes, they might have been a little slow or had their own issues, but they weren't dysfunctional. They all supported each other, and they were more than capable of doing things. I don't think that they're irrational as a group. You know what I mean? Like, I understand that some needed help, some didn't understand the severity of things, but as a group, they were totally fine. And I can't accept that it was just because they were quote-unquote too dumb. You know what I mean? And I'm saying that because that's what the people back then would say about the five boys. A lot of theories are tied to Gary, and I think that's totally because he's still not accounted for, and because of his history with his mental illness. Some people say that maybe he forced them to, and he had like a psychotic break. Some say that he killed them somehow because of this, and others say that he might have had ties to drugs because he was, had a drug problem, and before he got help, maybe he was tied up with something that he shouldn't have, and because of this, it led to, mean people, intervening in his life, I guess, for a lack of better words. Do I think this? I don't know. I don't think he had a moment. I've heard stories of a journal being found in the trailer that matched Gary's handwriting of different affirmations that he would tell himself when he got overwhelmed. And that's really depressing because his medication was helping him and his therapies were helping him. And then put in this situation, I believe that he made it to the trailer with Ted and then mourned his friend's death and then went out to try to get help and just never returned. And if this journal or in these affirmation story is true, then it shows that he was really holding on and was really hoping that something good was going to happen and that he was sane enough to understand that he was, slipping. And I think that if that's true, I don't believe that he had it in him to drive his friends out into the middle of nowhere and then get them lost in the woods. You know what I mean? I can't accept that. I can't accept that. Now, let's talk about this red truck thing that I keep talking about. So, the red pickup truck, as referenced earlier by Joseph, was also referenced by a tip called in by some random lady. This tip by this lady said that she worked at a store, like a grocery store, convenience store type thing, and two men came in to buy food and whatnot, and one of them matched Bill's description. She then also states that a third man matching Jackie Hewitt's description went to make a phone call to who I have no idea. And then the rest of the men stayed in the truck. Now, I've also heard a version where some lady calls in about a red truck and some guy and Bill coming out, and it was just the two of them. And I think they were asking for directions or something. I could be wrong. I don't remember. Now, I'm bringing this up because, well, one, it doesn't make sense because Jackie didn't like phones. He would never use the one, and he didn't like it. And so that's inconsistent with his character. But if it wasn't for Joseph's story of a red pickup truck, I'd throw this to the wind. But the fact that there are these accounts of the boys with this red pickup truck, I don't know, it seems a little weird. It seems a little sus, and I don't know what to make of that, because either you could go one or two ways. One being that this red truck was going to help them, take them somewhere, and then drop them off again. And that doesn't make any sense. But that's the best coinky-dink link we got of these stories. And that's what stresses me out about it, is because we can't know and we won't know what happened. There's nothing else what we could do. And that red truck idea kind of ties into like people forcing them out into the wilderness. Let's say, that maybe this red pickup truck that Joseph saw found the boys and was like, we can give you a ride, and then took the boys back to town somewhere. How did they end up back in the woods? Or maybe they were the ones that were forcing them into the woods in the beginning. Maybe like one of the red truck, maybe the red truck was tied up with some drug stuff. I don't know. You could take it so many different ways, but they're all just speculation. And I don't have the authority, I don't have the knowledge or the almighty power it would take to see what happened. And that's it. That's all they got. So with that being said, if you're going to go somewhere, I understand that this was the 70s, but if you're going to go somewhere, maybe tell people if there's going to be a slight deviation. Even if you're, a little lost, it might be good to contact somebody. I don't know, just be safe, be careful, take care of each other, and I will catch you in the next one.